most brutal punishment isn't what you do to them, it's what your absence makes them do to themselves. They expect you to scream, to cry, to fight for closure. We're all taught that our reaction is our power. But what if that's a lie? What if, the moment you lash out, you hand them the exact weapon they need to justify their betrayal? They'll call you unstable, weak, controlling. Your pain becomes their alibi. But what happens when you give them nothing? Not angry silence, but calm, deliberate withdrawal. That's when the real psychological battle begins, a battle they can't win because the enemy is their own conscience. In this video, we're unpacking a chillingly effective Machiavellian strategy. This isn't about the silent treatment. This is about psychological dominance through composure. You will learn how your calm becomes a mirror, forcing them to see their own reflection. Vlasisti, a weapon that only works when it's self-inflicted. And the single biggest mistake people make. Why you must never give them the closure they desperately seek. By the end of this, you won't just know how to walk away. You'll understand how to reclaim your power so completely that your absence becomes an unforgettable presence in their mind. If you're ready to stop reacting and start ascending, subscribe and join our community. We're not here for petty revenge. We're here to master the art of inner freedom. Revenge through silence, not reaction. Think back to the last time someone wronged you. Maybe they lied. Maybe they betrayed your trust. Maybe they walked away without giving you the decency of an explanation. In that moment, every instinct in you wanted to scream, to demand answers, to prove your worth, to make them see what they threw away. That's natural. It's the human impulse to want justice, to want acknowledgement. But here's the truth Machiavelli understood. The moment you explode, the moment you defend, the moment you chase, that's the moment you give them exactly what they need to feel justified. If you rage, they'll say you were unstable. If you beg, they'll say you were weak. If you argue, they'll say you were controlling. In other words, your reaction becomes the proof they needed to convince themselves they were right. But what happens when you don't play the part? What happens when you give them nothing? That's when the story starts to collapse. Because suddenly, they have no script to follow, no narrative that explains away their behavior. They're left in a vacuum, confused, unsettled, haunted by your calm. And that calm is not weakness, it's power. It forces them to sit alone with the one voice they cannot escape, their own conscience. That's why silence cuts deeper than words ever could. It doesn't just punish, it destabilizes. It takes away the ego's shield and leaves them exposed, naked to themselves. And here's where it becomes personal for you. Silence isn't about revenge alone. It's about reclaiming yourself. Every time you resist the urge to react, you prove to yourself that you are no longer controlled by their actions. You rise above the need for validation, above the trap of proving, above the noise of their excuses. You start to realize you don't need their apology. You don't need their recognition. You don't even need their understanding, because your silence already says everything. It says, I am beyond this. I am no longer playing in the story you tried to write for me. And that shift, that quiet refusal to react, isn't just revenge. It's liberation. It's you choosing dignity over drama, power over pain, presence over performance. And while they're left questioning themselves, you've already stepped into a new chapter where your worth no longer depends on anyone else seeing it. You saw it yourself. Guilt is self-inflicted. Here's the thing about guilt. No matter how much someone tries to deny it, hide it, or bury it beneath excuses, it always finds a way back to the surface. When you refuse to react, when you deny them the chaos they expected, you strip away the very scaffolding that was holding their story together. Think of it like a stage play. They wrote the script. You're the unstable one. You're the dramatic one. You're the one who made them leave. They're the rational hero who had no choice. But when you step off the stage and refuse to play the role, the entire performance crumbles. Suddenly, the spotlight is on them, and there's no one else to blame. That's when guilt starts whispering, not because you forced it on them, but because their own conscience refuses to stay silent. And this is where the real unraveling begins. The mind hates a gap it can't explain. If you yell, they can tell themselves you're bitter. If you beg, they can tell themselves you're weak. But if you're calm, if you're gone, if you're untouchable, they're left asking questions that grow heavier with time. Why didn't they fight? Why didn't they explain? What if I was the one who ruined something real? Have you ever seen this play out in your own life? Maybe someone walked away expecting you to collapse, and instead, you rose. And later, you noticed how their energy shifted, how they seemed uneasy in your presence, how their story about you didn't quite hold up anymore. That's not an accident. That's the invisible hand of guilt doing its quiet work. The beauty and the brutality of this truth is that you don't have to push it. You don't have to force anyone to feel sorry. In fact, the more you try, the more they resist. But when you step back with composure, you let their own mind become the judge, the jury, and the executioner. And trust me, no punishment you could ever give will be harsher than the one they eventually give themselves. Because guilt doesn't fade when it's self-inflicted. It lingers, it festers, it reshapes how they see you and how they see themselves. Silence must look powerful, not emotional. Silence is not the same as disappearing, and it's not the same as sulking in the shadows. Anyone can go quiet out of hurt or fear. That's not power, that's retreat. True Machiavellian silence is different. It's intentional, almost sculpted. It doesn't look like you're avoiding. It looks like you're choosing. And that choice is what unnerves the other person most. Think of it like standing in the middle of a storm, while everyone else expects you to run for cover. The wind howls, the rain falls, but you don't flinch. That image alone forces people to reconsider what you're made of, because when someone hurts you, they expect your silence to look heavy, emotional, desperate. They expect a performance of suffering. But when your silence looks light, steady, and strangely elegant, they can't reconcile it. Have you ever experienced that? A moment where someone wronged you and instead of reacting, you just breathed. You didn't text back paragraphs. You didn't launch into defense. You didn't slam doors or craft speeches. You simply withheld, not from anger, but from clarity. And in that stillness, you felt something shift. That's the kind of silence that creates psychological dissonance. Because suddenly, the person who thought they had power realizes they don't. They expected to be the center of your chaos, but instead, they're staring at your composure. And that composure says more than any confrontation ever could. It says, you cannot move me. You do not own my reactions. You do not dictate my story. And here's the deeper truth. When silence looks powerful, it doesn't just protect you from being manipulated. It changes the memory of you in their mind. Instead of remembering someone who fell apart, they remember someone who stayed grounded, someone who walked away without theatrics, someone they couldn't shake even when they tried. That memory becomes a weight, and over time it grows heavier than any words you could have spoken. Contrast fuels guilt. There's a strange kind of power in showing the world that you didn't just survive without someone. You became better. Not louder, not more dramatic, but quietly, steadily stronger. This is the essence of contrast, and it's the reason guilt begins to grow like a shadow in the mind of those who hurt you. They expected to look back and see you broken, clinging, falling apart. That expectation gave them comfort because it justified their choice. But when they look back and instead see you thriving, more centered, calmer, perhaps even happier, something inside them breaks. Their carefully crafted story no longer fits the reality in front of them. It's like planting a seed in their memory. Every time they think of you, they don't see weakness. They see strength. And that contradiction haunts them. Have you ever had someone underestimate you, only to later realize that your silence wasn't collapse, it was growth? Maybe they left thinking you'd crumble, and instead you began rising into a version of yourself that no longer needed them. That contrast doesn't just sting, it corrodes. It forces them to compare what they lost with what you've become, and the realization hurts more than any words you could have spoken. Because here's the truth. People can walk away and feel justified when they believe they left behind a storm, but they can't sleep as easily when they realize they abandoned peace, depth, and resilience. That's why Machiavelli's principle of contrast is so brutal. You don't flaunt your evolution. You don't try to prove anything. You simply live in alignment and let time do the rest. And in that quiet unfolding, the person who betrayed you is left to wrestle with a bitter question they never wanted to face. If they were this strong without me, what does that say about me? That's how contrast fuels guilt, not by making noise, but by letting your calm growth speak louder than any confrontation ever could. Never return. Never give closure. One of the hardest things to accept is that closure is not for you. It's for them. It's the lifeline they reach for when their conscience starts to drown. An apology, a final conversation, even a heated argument, all of it serves one hidden purpose: to release them from the weight of their own guilt. That's why Machiavelli would warn against giving it. Because the moment you explain, forgive, or even lash out, you hand them a narrative to cling to. They can twist your words into proof that the past wasn't as bad, that maybe they weren't entirely at fault, that the wound has finally closed. But silence leaves no such comfort. Silence is unfinished, and incompleteness gnaws at the human mind more than any answer ever could. Have you ever experienced that yourself? Think of a time when you didn't get closure from someone, when they simply walked away and left you with questions you couldn't resolve. Did you notice how your mind replayed the moments, searching for clarity that never came? That loop is the punishment. It's not dramatic, but it's devastating, because the imagination never stops trying to fill the gap. When you withhold closure, you're not being cruel. You're being precise. You're letting the truth sit exactly where it belongs, in their conscience, unanswered. And the beauty of it is this: time only makes it heavier. Weeks, months, even years later, they'll still be wondering why you never responded, why you never explained, why you never opened the door again. Every attempt to rationalize collapses in the face of your quiet refusal to return. And that refusal doesn't look bitter. It looks final. It looks like strength. It looks like you've gone somewhere they can't follow. That's what keeps the guilt alive. Not a dramatic ending, but the fact that there was no ending at all. And in that ambiguity, they're left to punish themselves, again and again, for breaking something that never gave them the comfort of forgiveness. You become their eternal mirror. At some point, something shifts. You stop existing in their mind as the person they knew, and you start existing as something heavier, something haunting, an eternal mirror. Every new relationship they enter, every choice they make, every moment of stillness late at night carries the quiet presence of you. Not because you're physically there, not because you're reaching out, but because your absence itself has become a kind of judgment. They look into that mirror and they don't see you. They see their mistake. They see the moment they chose betrayal over loyalty, ego over honesty, impulse over patience. And the weight of that reflection isn't temporary. It lingers. Because no matter how much they try to bury it, you've become the standard they can't erase. Have you noticed this in your own life? That people who wronged you sometimes resurface years later, not to reconnect, but to ease the discomfort of their own conscience. They circle back, not because they truly miss you, but because they want permission to stop feeling guilty. Yet if you remain grounded, if you remain silent, if you refuse to offer that release, the mirror only grows sharper. Over time, you're no longer a memory to them. You're a measure. They compare every face they see to yours, every kindness to the one you gave freely, every calm presence to the dignity you carried, even in pain. And the cruel irony is that the more they search, the more the contrast cuts. Because the void you left isn't something they can fill. It's something they have to live with. And that's what Machiavelli understood so well. You don't have to punish them directly. Life will do it for you. All you have to do is hold your silence, grow into yourself, and let them carry the weight of their own reflection. And the truth is, no one escapes that mirror forever. In the end, what Machiavelli teaches us isn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It's about reclaiming your power in the quietest, most dignified way possible. The deepest punishment isn't what you inflict on others. It's what they inflict on themselves when confronted with their own choices. Silence, composure, and growth are not just strategies. They're a declaration that you will no longer live at the mercy of someone else's story. You rise, not because they were wrong, but because you chose not to collapse. And that choice echoes longer than any argument ever could. So let this be your takeaway. You don't need closure. You don't need explanations. You don't even need to be understood. All you need is to walk with dignity, to let your absence speak, and to trust that time will always reveal the truth. When you move forward in calm strength, you stop being a victim of betrayal and become the mirror that reminds them of what they lost forever. That is not cruelty. That is freedom. If this message touched you, if it helped you see your own story more clearly, consider subscribing. I create this space for us to grow wiser, steadier, and stronger together, and I would love for you to be part of it. Now, I want to ask you, what's one truth you've realized today about silence, power, or self-respect? Share it in the comments. I'd love to hear your reflections. And if this message resonated with you, please like and share it so it can reach someone who might need it right now. Because sometimes the greatest gift we can give is not a reaction, but a reminder. Strength doesn't always speak. It often stays silent, and in that silence, it becomes unforgettable.